The realization that my own family viewed me as nothing more than a walking bank account did not hit me all at once, but rather it accumulated like a slow-acting poison over the course of a decade, finally reaching its lethal dose in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel. I stood before the gilded mirrors of the grand ballroom entrance, smoothing the emerald green silk of my Valentino gown, a garment that had cost me $4,500 and made me feel like a warrior queen preparing for battle. The reflection staring back at me was one of a woman who had conquered Atlanta's corporate underworld, a woman known simply as the Fixer to professional athletes and scandal-ridden CEOs who needed their problems to vanish. I had built a quiet empire solving impossible problems for powerful people. Yet, as I adjusted the diamond tennis bracelet on my wrist, I had to admit that the one problem I had never been able to solve was the insatiable greed of my own flesh and blood. The air around me smelled of expensive perfume, and the $15,000 worth of imported white hydrangeas that I had paid to have cascaded down the grand staircase, a specific demand from a bride who had a beer budget but champagne tastes. Every surface in the room, from the custom marble dance floor to the crystal stemware, represented a check I had signed and a wire transfer I had authorized, all to give my brother Marcus and his fiancée Tiffany the fairy tale wedding they believed they deserved. I took a deep breath and began to move toward the ballroom doors, the heels of my shoes clicking a rhythmic cadence against the polished floor that sounded suspiciously like a countdown. I was expecting to be ushered to table 1, the family table situated right next to the sweetheart stage, because that was the protocol we had discussed during 6 months of agonizing planning meetings where I sat writing checks while Tiffany pointed at things she could not afford. I had carried this family on my back for so long that the weight had become comfortable, a familiar burden that I mistook for love. I had paid off my mother's gambling debts when the sharks were circling. I had funded Marcus's legal defense when his recklessness nearly landed him in prison. And I had single-handedly financed this entire spectacle because Marcus had looked at me with those puppy dog eyes and told me it was the only way to make Tiffany happy. But as I approached the velvet rope guarding the VIP section, Tiffany stepped out from behind a decorative pillar like a serpent in a strapless Vera Wang gown. She looked undeniably stunning in the dress that I had swiped my card for 3 months ago because her own credit card had been declined at the bridal salon, a humiliation she had seemingly forgotten the moment the receipt printed. She held a glass of champagne in one hand, and her smile was a tight, practiced grimace that did not reach her cold blue eyes. She blocked my path with a casual arrogance that made my blood run cold, sipping her champagne as she scanned me from head to toe with a look of critical disdain, usually reserved for a stain on a carpet. She told me that I looked bold tonight, and remarked that the green of my dress was very aggressive, her voice high and breathy with fake sweetness. I kept my voice neutral and thanked her, stating that I was just heading to my seat to make sure Mum was settled before the ceremony began. But Tiffany took a step to the right and effectively cut off my access to the VIP area. She took another slow sip of her drink and told me that there had been a tiny change in the seating chart, informing me that I was not at table 1 anymore. I frowned and demanded to know what she meant, reminding her that table 1 was for immediate family, parents and siblings, and that I was Marcus's only sister. She reached out to pat my arm with a condescending familiarity that made my skin crawl, but I pulled away before she could make contact. She sighed as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler, and told me that they were going for a very specific aesthetic for the reception photos, describing the theme as creams, pastels, and soft lighting with ethereal vibes. She lowered her voice as if sharing a conspiracy, and pointed out that Marcus was light-skinned, and she was obviously pale, while my parents had that lovely café au lait complexion, but I was very dark. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as her words hung in the air between us, heavy with a bigotry she was trying to dress up as artistic direction. She told me that if I sat at the head table, I would throw off the colour balance of the candid shots they were planning to send to Vogue, and she actually expected me to understand. I felt the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out the sound of the string quartet that I was paying $8,000 to play in the corner. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of a woman standing in a dress I paid for, at a wedding I financed, telling me that my blackness was an inconvenience to her Instagram aesthetic. I asked her if she was seriously moving my seat because my skin tone did not match her colour palette, giving her one last chance to claim it was a joke. She rolled her eyes and told me not to make it a race thing, insisting it was purely an aesthetic decision to ensure the photos looked cohesive. She pointed a manicured finger toward the far back corner of the ballroom, a dimly lit area shadowed by a large decorative column and situated directly next to the swinging double doors where the catering staff was already rushing in and out with trays of appetizers. She told me that table 28 was lovely, and that sitting there would keep me out of the main sightlines so the photographer would not have to work around me. She added with a sneer that since I was paying for the catering, I could keep an eye on the staff to make sure they were getting their money's worth, framing my banishment as a management opportunity. I stood there stunned, the numbers swirling in my head like a tornado of wasted generosity. I had spent $450,000 on this family over the last decade, sacrificing my own comfort to ensure they never felt the cold wind of reality. And now I was being told to sit by the kitchen door like the help. I waited for the punchline, expecting Marcus to jump out and apologize. But instead, my mother appeared at Tiffany's side. Mama Louise was wearing a gold sequined gown that I had purchased for her, a dress entirely too young for her 60 years, and she was beaming with a pride that had nothing to do with me. I turned to her, desperate for a sanity check, and asked if she had heard what Tiffany just said, explaining that the bride wanted to move me to the back of the room because of my skin colour. Mama Louise did not look at me with outrage or protection. Instead, she looked at Tiffany with that adoring smile she usually reserved for Marcus and told me not to start drama. She waved her hand dismissively and said that Tiffany had a vision and that this was her special day, reminding me how important appearances were to her family. She told me that we needed to make a good impression, as if my very existence was something that needed to be apologized for. I repeated the words "good impression" back to her, my voice trembling with suppressed rage, and reminded her that I was her daughter and the only reason we were standing in the St. Regis instead of a community centre basement. Mama Louise let out a bored sigh, the kind of sound a parent makes when a child is being particularly tiresome, and told me that while they were grateful, I had to admit that I could be a bit overpowering. She said that I had always been the difficult one, whereas Marcus shone when he was front and centre with his movie star looks. She told me that I was more of a behind-the-scenes person, and that I should just go sit at table 28 and eat my dinner. She added the final dagger by saying that I could leave early if I wanted to, because nobody would notice. Nobody would notice. Those 3 words cut deeper than any knife, severing the last thread of loyalty I held for the people standing in front of me. I looked past them toward table 1 and saw the empty chair where my name card used to be. But it was not empty anymore. Sitting there, laughing and drinking the vintage Dom Perignon I had paid for, was Becky, Tiffany's maid of honour. Becky, with her blonde hair and pale skin, fit perfectly into their cream and pastel fantasy. They had not just moved me, they had replaced me with a stranger because she fit the picture better than the woman who had funded the entire production. I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent her entire life worshipping lightness, and who had clearly decided that my dignity was a small price to pay for her proximity to whiteness. A strange calm washed over me, the kind of clarity that comes only when a bridge has been burned so thoroughly that there is no way back across. I realised in that moment that I did not have a family. I had dependents, I had leeches, and I had employees who were very bad at their jobs. Today was layoff day. I looked at Tiffany, who was watching me with a smug expression, waiting for the angry black woman reaction so she could play the victim and tell Marcus his sister was unstable. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I forced my voice to remain smooth and devoid of emotion as I told her that I understood and that she wanted the photos to be perfect. Tiffany clapped her hands in delight, relieved that I had submitted to her will, and told me to head over to table 28 because the salad course was coming out soon. I told her that I would, but first I needed to check something at the gift table. I turned on my heel and began the longest walk of my life, moving through the ballroom, not toward the service exit or the shadowed corner where they had tried to banish me, but toward the spotlight. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, the heels of my shoes striking the marble floor with a sound that echoed underneath the swelling strings of the orchestra. As I glided past the round tables draped in heavy cream linens, I could feel the eyes of the guests latching onto me. These were the elite of Atlanta: doctors, lawyers, real estate moguls, and influencers, people whose scandals I had fixed and whose secrets I kept. I had paid for the plates of Chilean sea bass sitting in front of them and the crystal flutes they were raising in toasts. A hush began to ripple through the room, spreading outward from my path like a wave. Not the respectful silence of a ceremony, but the confused tension of a crowd sensing a disruption in the program. Inside my mind, I was tallying every invoice, every wire transfer, and every credit card swipe I had executed for this family over the last decade. The $50,000 for Marcus's legal fees, the $30,000 for Tiffany's credit card debt so she could enter the marriage with a clean slate, the medical bills, the vacations, the cars. It all swirled into a vortex of wasted generosity. I passed table 4 where my Auntie Sarah sat, and she waved a napkin at me, oblivious to the war that had just been declared. I did not wave back. I could not break character. I was no longer Simone the beautiful daughter. I was Simone the fixer, and I was about to fix the biggest financial mistake of my life. I reached the centre of the room where the gift table had been set up like a shrine to avarice, draped in white velvet and illuminated by its own dedicated lighting rig. In the middle of the table, inside a locked glass display case, sat the crown jewel of their greed, a novelty check. It was an oversized piece of foam board, 3 feet long, printed with the details of my generosity for all the world to see. It was made out to the happy couple in the amount of $100,000, with the memo line reading, quote, 1, quote. It was tacky, it was classless, and it was exactly what Tiffany wanted. She wanted everyone to know they were buying a mansion, but she wanted it to look like a family blessing rather than a handout. She wanted the clout without the work. I stopped in front of the display, my reflection caught in the glass, looking powerful and terrifying. The glass case was secured with a small gold latch, and I reached out with a steady hand. My manicure was perfect as I flipped the latch, the click sounding soft in the room but booming like a gunshot in my ears. I lifted the glass lid and set it aside on the velvet cloth, the air conditioning feeling cold against my skin while my blood boiled with a clarity I had never felt before. I reached in and grabbed the foam board check, finding it light and cheap, just like the love my family claimed to have for me. I lifted it high above my head, wanting them to see, wanting the photographers to capture this moment, wanting the videographer to zoom in. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye and looked toward the raised sweetheart stage across the dance floor. Tiffany and Marcus were freezing in the middle of a toast, Tiffany's glass halfway to her lips. Her eyes went wide as they locked onto the giant check in my hands, and she nudged Marcus violently, spilling champagne on his white tuxedo. I did not look away from them as I gripped the top of the foam board with both hands. I pulled with a sudden, violent force. The sound of ripping cardboard and foam was jagged and loud, tearing through the polite murmurs of the ballroom like a scream. I ripped it right down the middle, bisecting my signature, and then I put the 2 halves together and ripped them again and again. I shredded their prop, their symbol of status, until it was nothing but a pile of jagged scraps at my feet. The room was deadly silent now, the orchestra trailing off into a discordant squeak. The only sound was the flutter of foam pieces hitting the floor. But I was not done. For the prop was just theatre, and I needed the reality. Next to the display stand sat a heavy cream-coloured envelope sealed with red wax bearing my personal crest. This contained the actual cashier's cheque, the liquid funds, the key to their future. I picked up the envelope and ran my thumb over the wax seal, feeling its texture and knowing it represented 10 years of 60-hour work weeks, missed holidays and sleepless nights. I opened my vintage clutch purse, slid the envelope inside, and snapped the clasp shut with a finality that felt like a prison door closing. A voice hissed my name, low and furious, and I turned to see Marcus storming toward me. He had crossed the dance floor in record time, his face flushed a dark red that clashed with his white suit. He looked panicked, like a man watching his life support system being unplugged. He reached me and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin with a desperation that bordered on violence. He leaned in close, trying to keep his voice down to maintain the illusion of a happy family discussion, but his eyes were wild with fear. He whispered furiously, asking me what the hell I was doing and demanding that I put the check back immediately. He told me I was making a scene and that everyone was watching. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, remembering that this was the hand I used to hold when we were children, and I was terrified of the dark. It was the hand I had put cash into when he was broke, and now it felt like the hand of a stranger. I told Marcus to let go of me, keeping my voice ice cold, and warned him that if he did not release me, I would have security remove him from his own wedding. I reminded him that since I paid for the security, they answered to me. He flinched at the threat but did not let go, his grip tightening as he accused me of being drunk and jealous. He told me to just put the check back and go sit down, promising that we could talk about this tomorrow. I looked him dead in the eye and told him there was no tomorrow, only right now. I told him that Tiffany had ordered me to stand by the kitchen door because my skin was too dark for her photos and that I ruined the aesthetic. Marcus blinked, looking over his shoulder at his new wife, who was watching us with a look of pure terror. And then he looked back at me. He did not deny it, nor did he get angry on my behalf. Instead, he just looked annoyed. He told me that she was stressed because she was a bride and that I knew how she got. He claimed she did not mean it like that and that I was overreacting, then demanded I give him the envelope because they needed that money for the closing on Tuesday. The closing on Tuesday. That was all he cared about. Not my dignity, not the racism coming from the woman he just vowed to love, just the closing and the money. I laughed, a dry and humourless sound that echoed in the quiet room. I told him he was right and that I was overreacting, admitting sarcastically that I should not be making a scene and should be respecting the aesthetic. I yanked my arm free from his grasp with a force that made him stumble back a step, and then I smoothed the fabric of my Valentino gown, dusting off the invisible contamination of his touch. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, until I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. I asked him in a low, lethal voice if he wanted a perfect wedding and clean photos without me cluttering them up. I asked if he wanted the fairy tale. I paused, letting the words hang there like a guillotine blade, and then told him that I was giving him exactly what he asked for. I announced that I was removing myself from the frame permanently and taking my aesthetic with me. I patted my clutch where the $100,000 sat safe and sound and told him to consider this a return to sender. I turned on my heel, and the crowd of elite guests parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and titillation as they realised they were witnessing the social event of the season for all the wrong reasons. I could feel their gazes burning into the back of my neck, and I could hear the whispers starting a rising tide of gossip that would undoubtedly consume Atlanta by morning, with everyone asking if I was really leaving and if I had truly taken back the gift. I did not look left or right, keeping my chin high and my expression unreadable as I walked straight toward the main exit, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. As I passed the head table, I saw Mama Louise clutching her pearls, her face a mask of horror that I knew had nothing to do with maternal concern and everything to do with financial terror. She was not looking at me with worry. She was staring at the clutch purse tucked under my arm, mourning the loss of the money rather than the loss of her daughter. She called out to me, her voice cracking as she shouted that I could not do this to them. But I did not stop, nor did I slow down. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the ballroom, and the cool air of the lobby hit my face like a splash of cold water, the silence of the hallway jarring after the suffocating intensity of the room. I kept walking faster now, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, while adrenaline flooded my system, making my fingertips tingle with the realization that I had actually done it. I reached the valet stand where the attendant, a young man named Jamal, who knew me by name and tipped his hat with genuine respect, saw my face and sprinted for the key box without asking a single question. He knew better than to make small talk when I looked like a woman who had just set a building on fire, and he pulled my Porsche Panamera up to the curb with the engine purring, a sound of pure power. I handed him a $100 bill because I could, because I was rich, and because that money was mine to spend on anyone except the ungrateful people inside that hotel. As I slid into the driver's seat, I took one last look at the entrance of the St. Regis, half expecting Marcus to come running out to chase me, to beg or to apologize. But the doors remained closed, and I knew that he was probably inside, trying to spin the narrative, telling everyone I was crazy and trying to salvage the party, while comforting Tiffany with lies about how I would come crawling back. He had no idea that the bank was permanently closed. I put the car in gear and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the humid night air as I watched the hotel shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just a glowing speck in the distance. I was alone, I had no family, and I had a dress worth thousands of dollars with nowhere to go. Yet I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. But as I merged onto the highway, the reality of the modern world intruded on my solitude as the first vibration buzzed against my hip, followed immediately by another, and then a continuous stream that made my phone dance on the passenger seat. The digital bombardment had begun, and I knew that while they were not chasing me with their feet, they were chasing me with their thumbs. I glanced at the screen to see names flashing rapidly. Marcus, Mama, Tiffany, and even Becky, the bridesmaid who had stolen my seat. I reached over and flipped the phone face down on the leather seat, deciding to let them panic and sweat while they wondered if I was bluffing. I drove toward the city skyline, my mind already moving to the next phase of the operation, because a fixer does not just create a problem, she manages the fallout. They thought this was the worst of it, believing that losing the down payment was the tragedy. But they had forgotten about the honeymoon, and the fact that while I had physically left the building, my credit card was still in their pockets. My digital footprint was stamped all over their dream vacation, and as I smiled in the darkness of the car, I whispered to the empty air that Marcus should enjoy the flight, because when he landed, I was going to teach him the real cost of a clean aesthetic. My penthouse apartment in Midtown Atlanta was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended 20 stories above the chaos of the city. A sanctuary I had built with the money they so despised, yet so desperately needed. I stepped out of the private elevator, and the silence of my home, usually a comfort, felt heavy tonight, ringing in my ears like the aftermath of an explosion. I kicked off my Louis Vuitton heels, leaving them where they fell on the white oak floors, and walked straight to the wet bar to pour myself a glass of Cabernet from a bottle that cost $500. I collapsed onto my Italian leather sofa and finally looked at the device that had been vibrating against my thigh for the last 30 minutes, seeing that my phone screen was a battlefield, lit up with notifications, scrolling past faster than I could read them. There were 90 missed calls, 112 text messages, and voicemails filling up the inbox until it was at capacity. I opened the thread with Marcus first and saw that he had sent a voice note 2 minutes ago. I pressed play, and his voice filled my quiet living room, distorted by rage and background noise, screaming that I was selfish and jealous, and that I had ruined everything. He claimed Tiffany was locked in the bathroom, crying her eyes out, and that the photographer was charging them overtime, demanding that I bring the check back immediately or he would never speak to me again. I did not feel fear or guilt as his voice faded. Instead, I felt a cold, hard knot of disgust tightening in my stomach at his command to fix this. Because fix this was the mantra of our entire relationship. I opened Mama Louise's messages next, finding a stream of consciousness diatribe written in all capital letters, where she called me a disgrace to the family and claimed she had raised me better. She asked how I dared to embarrass my brother in front of white people and accused me of thinking I was better than them because I was dark and they were light. She told me that I was just bitter and threatened that if I did not transfer the money by midnight, I should not bother coming to Sunday dinner ever again because I was dead to her. The irony was suffocating because I was apparently dead to her unless her mortgage was due, or unless she needed a new dress for church, or unless the power company was threatening to cut off the lights. I took a long sip of wine, letting the rich liquid coat my throat as I stared at the city lights, twinkling below me like diamonds scattered on black velvet. I let my mind drift back to the memories I had suppressed for years, needing to review the receipts of emotional debt to remind myself why I was doing this. The memories hit me with the force of a physical blow, transporting me back to the parking lot of the Lucky Star Casino 5 years ago at 3 a.m. It was raining, and I was 27 years old, having just landed my first major client. But instead of celebrating, I was standing in the rain, handing a duffel bag filled with $20,000 in cash to a man with a neck tattoo and a gun tucked into his waistband. Mama Louise sat in my car sobbing because she had gambled away her pension and the loan on her house, and then she had borrowed money from people who sent broken bones instead of late notices. I had emptied my savings account to save her life, and on the drive home, she had wiped her eyes and told me not to tell Marcus because he worried so much. She had told me that I was strong and could handle the stress, while Marcus was sensitive. I gripped the wine glass tighter as I remembered realizing that to her, Marcus was the prince and I was the mule. The memory shifted to a fluorescent-lit holding cell at the county jail 3 years ago, where Marcus sat on a metal bench wearing an orange jumpsuit. He had been arrested for a DUI after crashing his leased BMW, and he had begged me to help him because a felony conviction would end his real estate career before it began. I had hired the most expensive criminal defense attorney in Atlanta, paying $50,000 in legal fees and pulling strings with the district attorney's office to get the charges reduced to reckless driving. Marcus avoided jail time and kept his license. But a week later at Sunday dinner, he bragged to the family about how he had talked his way out of it, never mentioning my name or the check I wrote. When I confronted him privately, he had laughed and told me that was what big sisters were for, dismissing my sacrifice as just a tax write-off for someone with my money. Then there was Tiffany, the woman who wanted clean photos and thought my skin was a blemish on her aesthetic. I remembered sitting in the waiting room of a plastic surgery clinic in Buckhead last year because Tiffany wanted a mummy makeover before the wedding, despite not being a mother. She had cried to Marcus that she felt ugly, and Marcus had come to me claiming she was depressed and needed this for her mental health. I paid the $30,000 bill for the surgery that sculpted the body she was currently flaunting in that $4,500 wedding dress. And I paid for the face that was currently sneering at me from the wedding photos popping up on Instagram. I opened the calculator app on my phone and started typing numbers, tallying the casino debt, the lawyer fees, the surgery, the cars I had co-signed for, the vacations I had sponsored, and the rent checks I had covered when Marcus had a slow month, which was every month. The number on the screen grew larger and larger until it hit $450,000, nearly $500,000 that I had poured into a black hole. That was the black tax I had paid, the price of admission to a family that would not even give me a seat at the table. I set the phone down on the marble coffee table as the vibration finally paused, the storm reloading for its next volley. I stood up and walked to my home office, a glass-walled room that floated above the city, and sat down at my desk to open my laptop. I logged into my American Express account, knowing that I had given Marcus a supplementary platinum card 2 years ago for emergencies only, which he had naturally abused for dinners and clubs. I navigated to the recent transactions tab, expecting to see charges from the wedding, but what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There at the top of the list was a pending charge stamped just 20 minutes ago. Qatar Airways, 2 first-class tickets, Atlanta to Doha, Doha to Male, totaling $15,400. I stared at the screen, blinking as the realization washed over me that they were currently at the wedding reception screaming at me via text message, yet they had stepped away from the drama just long enough to book their honeymoon flights. They knew the house deal was dead, so they had decided to blow the budget on the trip, doubling down on their entitlement and betting on my weakness. They assumed I would not notice, or worse, that I would notice and be too desperate for their love to do anything about it. The audacity was breathtaking, almost impressive in its absolute lack of shame. I looked at the timestamp and realised they must have booked it on their phones in the bathroom or while huddled in a corner. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and steepled my fingers, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. They wanted to go to the Maldives. They wanted the overwater villa, and they wanted the white sand and turquoise water. I hovered my mouse over the freeze card button, knowing it would be so easy to click it right now and strand them at the airport tomorrow morning. But that was too easy. That was an amateur move. A fixer does not just stop the problem. A fixer lets the problem escalate until it is catastrophic, and then controls the explosion. If I stopped them now, they would just be in Atlanta, angry and loud, coming to my building to harass me. But if I let them get on that plane, if I let them fly 12,000 miles away to an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean where they knew no one and where everything cost a fortune, then I would have them. I withdrew my hand from the mouse and closed the browser tab, whispering to the empty office for Marcus to go ahead and take his wife. I told the empty room to let them drink the champagne and stretch out their legs, because it was the last comfortable moment they were going to have for a very long time. I shut the laptop with a soft snap, feeling like the weatherman who had just forecasted a hurricane. I picked up my wine glass and walked back to the window, looking down at the city that was asleep and unaware of the drama unfolding in the sky above. Tomorrow, my brother and his wife would be in the air, thinking they had gotten away with it and believing that Simone the bank was still open for business. They did not know that the bank had been foreclosed, the vault was locked, and they were about to land in a prison of their own making. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of calm preparation, going to the gym, answering emails from my actual paying clients, and sleeping for 8 hours straight. When I woke up the next morning, I reached for my phone to check in on the happy couple, opening Instagram to see Tiffany's public profile. Her story circle was glowing red, and when I tapped it, the first slide was a boomerang of 2 glasses of champagne clinking in the first-class cabin, with a caption about hubby treating her like a queen. I laughed, knowing that quote 4 was treating her with my money. The next slide was a selfie of Tiffany wearing a white silk eye mask with a paragraph-long text overlay about leaving negativity behind. She wrote that some people were just so miserable they could not stand to see others shining, and claimed that God brought her to high places to separate her from low people. I stared at the words quote 5, realizing she was referring to the woman who paid for the face she was photographing. The next slide was a video of Marcus sleeping, with a caption calling him her king, who protected her from toxic energy. I took screenshots of everything, every caption, every timestamp, every smug smile, and saved them to a folder labelled quote 6. They were digging their own grave with every post, and I was just collecting the dirt. I waited for the next day to arrive with the patience of a sniper who knows the target is walking directly into the crosshairs, watching their vacation unfold through the digital window of Tiffany's Instagram updates. They had arrived at the resort, one of those ultra-luxury private island properties where the villas sat on stilts over the turquoise water, looking like a paradise that was completely out of their tax bracket. Tiffany posted a room tour video where she squealed with delight, narrating that they had been upgraded to the Sunset Overwater Villa with a private pool, and claiming that Marcus made it happen because he knew she loved a sunset. I knew for a fact that Marcus did not make it happen. The American Express Platinum Concierge made it happen because the card had a high spending history, which was entirely my spending history. The room rate for that villa was $3,000 a night, a number that would have bankrupted Marcus in less than 48 hours if he were paying with his own money. I watched as they ordered a floating breakfast consisting of trays of exotic fruit, pastries, and lobster Benedict bobbing in their private pool, which was another $500 charge added to the growing tab. They were living the life of billionaires on the credit of a woman they had relegated to the back of the room, and their lack of awareness was truly staggering. The spending spree continued throughout the day as I watched them film themselves on a private yacht rental for a sunset cruise, a little excursion that cost $2,000 for 3 hours of pretending to own the ocean. I watched as they went to the spa for a couple's massage with gold-infused oil, another $1,000 poured down the drain for the sake of relaxation they had not earned. They were spending money like water, swiping the card without a care in the world because, in their minds, the card was a magic wand that made things appear without consequence. They did not think about the bill because they never had to. I was the invisible safety net that caught them every time they fell, and they had become so accustomed to the net that they forgot gravity existed. I sat in my office in Atlanta, calculating the total in my head as their vacation unfolded in real time on my screen. Between the first-class flights, the room upgrade, the yacht, the spa, and the food, they had easily racked up $25,000 in 48 hours. Not a single cent of it was theirs. They were comfortable now, relaxed and feeling safe, thinking I was back in Atlanta, stewing in my bitterness while they lived the high life. They were wrong. I was not stewing. I was preparing to foreclose. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into the American Express portal again, watching as the pending charges started to populate the screen like an indictment. I saw charges for the St. Regis Maldives, Qatar Airways, and the seaplane transfer, and the total balance was staggering enough to buy a decent car. I took a deep breath and thought about the table by the kitchen door, remembering the humiliation of being told I was a blemish on their aesthetic. I thought about Mama Louise telling me to stay out of the frame and Tiffany calling me, quote, 7 to her followers. I moved my mouse to the card management section and selected the supplementary card issued to Marcus Brooks. I clicked the option to report the card lost or stolen, and a pop-up window appeared asking if I wanted to freeze the account immediately. I clicked yes without hesitation. Another window appeared asking if I wanted to cancel all active bookings and reservations associated with the card for security purposes. I clicked yes again. The screen refreshed and a red banner appeared at the top stating that the card was cancelled and a fraud alert was active. It was done. The magic wand was broken and the safety net was gone. I leaned back and interlaced my fingers behind my head, ready for the waiting game to end and the real show to begin. It was currently dinner time in the Maldives, and I knew they were likely at one of the resort's fine dining restaurants, perhaps the famous underwater one where guests ate surrounded by sharks, which felt poetically appropriate. They would finish their meal, the waiter would bring the bill, and Marcus would reach into his pocket to pull out the heavy metal platinum card with a confident smile. The smile of a man who thinks he owns the world. The waiter would walk away, swipe the card, and then the machine would beep with the error message that would end their fantasy. I closed my eyes and imagined the sound, deciding it was the sweetest sound in the world, the sound of reality crashing down on entitlement. I checked my phone, which was silent for now, and poured myself a glass of water to stay hydrated for the chaos that was coming. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a notification from American Express, informing me that a transaction of $3,200 at Ithaca Undersea Restaurant had been declined. I smiled. 5 minutes later, the phone vibrated again, with another decline for the same amount. Then the text message from Marcus arrived, asking if I'd forgotten to pay the bill and telling me to call the bank quickly because the card was acting weird. I did not reply to the text, choosing instead to watch the messages roll in as the tone shifted from annoyed to panicked. 2 minutes later, another text arrived, where Marcus demanded I pick up the phone, saying it was embarrassing and telling me to fix it. I watched the texts accumulate, his desperation growing with each unread message as he told me the manager was there and that I needed to pick up immediately. Then the call started. Marcus, then Tiffany, then Marcus again. I let them ring, watching the screen light up and go dark in a beautiful rhythm that signaled their descent into chaos. I imagined the scene clearly. The waiter returning with the card, the polite but firm request for another form of payment, and Marcus patting his pockets while pretending to look for another card he knew he did not have. I imagined Tiffany stopping mid-selfie as she realised something was wrong, the manager stepping in with his smile fading, and the other diners turning to look. They were finally getting the attention they craved, finally being the centre of the room, just not in the way they wanted. I took a sip of water and whispered to the empty room that I was not low people. I was the bank, and the bank was closed for the night. According to the frantic voicemails that started to populate my inbox, the situation in the Maldives was escalating rapidly. Marcus had tried to explain that it was just a misunderstanding and that his sister handled their finances, begging the manager to let him make a call. The manager, however, was not interested in family dynamics. He was interested in the $3,000 bill for the dinner they had just consumed. He gave them 30 minutes to settle the bill before he would have to involve the local authorities, explaining that in the Maldives, theft of services was a very serious offence. He also informed them that the resort would be holding their passports until payment was confirmed. I could hear Tiffany shrieking in the background of one voicemail, screaming that they could not take their passports, but the manager remained unmoved. He signalled to security guards to block the exit, trapping Marcus and Tiffany in a glass tube at the bottom of the ocean, with no money, no way out, and a massive debt hanging over their heads. In Atlanta, my phone began to vibrate again, starting as a low hum against the marble surface of my desk, before the screen lit up with Marcus's name in big white letters. I watched it ring, imagining him standing there in his tuxedo, sweating and shaking, holding the phone to his ear with a desperate grip, while Tiffany cried and ruined the makeup I had paid for. They were panicking, terrified, and for the first time in their lives, facing a consequence that I was not going to shield them from. They were realising that without me, they were nothing but two broke people in expensive clothes they could not afford. The phone stopped ringing, a voicemail notification popped up, and then it started ringing again immediately, but this time it was Tiffany. I looked at her name and remembered her voice telling me to stand by the kitchen door, remembered her laughing as she took my seat, and I decided not to answer. I did not decline the call either. I just let it ring because I wanted them to have hope. I wanted them to think that maybe I was just busy, maybe I was in the shower, and maybe I would pick up on the next ring to save them like I always did. I wanted them to keep calling and watching the minutes tick down on the manager's deadline, while the phone rang and rang in an empty room. The vibration rattled the desk, the sound of their desperation filling the silence of my victory. I reached out and slowly, deliberately, turned the phone face down. The silence in my office was absolute once the ringing stopped, and the peace was profound. I poured myself another glass of wine, knowing I had 30 minutes to kill before the police arrived in the Maldives to escort my brother away. I wondered if they would let Marcus keep his tuxedo in the holding cell, or if they would strip him of his dignity completely. I took a sip and watched the city lights, knowing the show was going exactly according to script, and the best part was that I did not even have to say a line. My silence was the most powerful speech I had ever given. While my brother was hyperventilating in a glass tunnel 5,000 miles away, I was sitting in my climate-controlled office in Buckhead, sipping an espresso that was perfectly brewed as the sun began to rise over Atlanta. The sun was fully up now, casting sharp shadows across my desk, and the silence in the room was a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding across the globe. But my work was not done yet. I had stranded them, but I had not yet evicted them. That was the second head of the monster I had to cut off, and the timing had to be perfect. I picked up my office phone, the landline that had a direct connection to the movers and shakers of Atlanta real estate, and dialed a number I knew by heart. It belonged to David, a luxury broker who had sold homes to half the professional athletes in the city, thanks to my referrals. He was the one managing the sale of the estate Marcus and Tiffany were supposed to close on in 3 days. David answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and professional, assuming I was calling to confirm the wire transfer for the closing on Tuesday. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the skyline, and told him that I was actually calling with different news. I instructed him to pull my file, specifically the guarantor letter and the proof of funds document I'd signed for Marcus Brooks. I heard the typing of a keyboard on the other end as David confirmed he had the documents and noted that everything looked standard, adding that they were just waiting on the $100,000 cashier's check I promised for the down payment. He mentioned that the sellers were very excited to close, unaware that the deal was already dead in the water. I kept my voice flat and businesslike as I told David that there would be no check and that I was formally withdrawing my guarantor status effective immediately. I also informed him that I was rescinding the gift letter and that the funds in my account were no longer available for this transaction. The typing stopped abruptly, and there was a heavy pause on the line as David processed what this meant. He knew Marcus's credit score was in the low 600s. He knew Tiffany had more debt than income, and he knew that without my financial backbone standing behind them, that application was nothing but paper and dreams. David whispered my name, his voice dropping as he warned me that if I pulled out now, the financing would collapse. He explained that the underwriters had approved the loan based entirely on my asset portfolio and my guarantee, and if he told the lenders I was out, the deal would die instantly. I told him that I knew, and that was exactly the point. I instructed him to kill the deal, to notify the seller's agents, and to tell the bank that the guarantor had withdrawn due to a breach of personal contract. David stammered, losing his cool as he reminded me that we were 3 days from closing and brought up the earnest money. He reminded me that the $10,000 Marcus put down to hold the property was non-refundable, and that if the financing fell through because of the buyer's failure to secure funds, they would lose it all. I knew that too. That $10,000 was the only money Mama Louise had to her name. She had cashed out a small life insurance policy she had held for decades just to help them secure the contract so I could pay the rest. She had given it to Marcus with tears in her eyes, calling it her legacy. I told David cold as ice that it was collateral damage. I ordered him to process the cancellation and send the official notice to the buyers. I added one final instruction: do not call Marcus because he is currently unavailable. Instead, I told him to call his mother, as she was listed as the secondary contact. I hung up the phone, feeling not a shred of remorse. They wanted to play house in a mansion they could not afford while treating the financier like a servant. And now they could go back to playing house in a rental apartment, if they could even afford that. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, looking down at the street where the Sunday traffic was beginning to thin, and I could almost see the invisible shockwaves travelling from my phone to the exclusive country club where I knew Mama Louise was currently having brunch. It was Sunday, which meant it was her time to shine among the church mothers and the social climbers of the community. 5 miles away, at the Piedmont Driving Club, Mama Louise was undoubtedly sitting at a prime table, wearing a hat that was too big and a suit that was too bright, holding court with a mimosa in one hand and her phone in the other. I could picture the scene as clearly as if I were watching a movie. She would be showing them photos of the Buckhead estate on her phone, scrolling through the Zillow listing that she had saved to her favourites. She would be pointing out the marble foyer to anyone who would listen, bragging that it was just like the ones in the magazines, and claiming that Marcus earned this through his hard work. She would tell them that Tiffany was going to decorate the nursery in the East Wing and that her grandbabies were going to grow up like royalty, conveniently leaving out the part about me, the daughter who actually paid the bills. In her version of the story, Marcus was a real estate mogul, not a broke salesman living on his sister's charity, and she was the matriarch of a dynasty rather than a gambling addict I had bailed out more times than I could count. Then her phone would ring, and she would see David's name on the screen, answering it with a smug smile because she would think he was calling to congratulate her or ask for a final signature on some minor paperwork. I imagined the blood draining from her face as David delivered the news that the financing for the house had been denied because the guarantor had withdrawn. She would stammer and ask what that meant, her voice rising in panic as the other women at the table went quiet, sensing blood in the water. David would deliver the final blow by informing her that the $10,000 was gone, seized as a forfeit penalty because the contract was voided due to the buyer's failure to secure funds. The sellers were keeping it, and the house was back on the market as of 5 minutes ago. I checked my watch and saw that it had been 10 minutes since I hung up with David. The timeline was proceeding perfectly, and the devastation was right on schedule. Right on cue, my office phone rang again, and it was the front desk security downstairs. The guard, Earl, sounded tight and anxious as he told me that there was a woman there claiming to be my mother. He said she was very upset, demanding to come up, and screaming that it was an emergency. I smiled, realizing she had moved faster than I expected, likely leaving the brunch mid-mimosa and speeding across town in her beat-up sedan. I asked Earl if she was on the guest list, knowing full well she was not. When he confirmed that she was not listed, I told him that she did not come up, reminding him of the protocol that required an appointment for access. Earl sounded uncomfortable as he told me that she was making a scene in the lobby, screaming that I had stolen her money and that I was trying to ruin her life. He mentioned that people were filming her with their phones, and I told him to let them film because it was good content. I instructed him to listen to me carefully and told him that if she tried to get past the turnstiles, he was to call the police immediately. I ordered him not to let her on the elevator and not to call me again unless she was in handcuffs. I hung up the phone and walked over to the wall of monitors in my office, where I had a live feed of the lobby security cameras. I turned on the screen, and there she was. Mama Louise, the woman who had told me I was too dark to be in the family photos, now providing a spectacle for the entire building. She was pounding on the glass of the turnstiles, her hat askew and her face contorted in a mask of pure rage that made her look unhinged. She was screaming at the security guard, pointing a finger in his face and looking desperate, like a woman who had just realized that her golden child was made of pyrite and her bank account was empty. I zoomed in on the camera feed and watched her crumbling in real time. She grabbed her phone and started dialing, and my cell phone on the desk started to vibrate instantly. I looked at the screen and saw quote 8 flashing, but I did not answer. I just watched her shout into her phone on the monitor, leaving me a voicemail that I would save for future legal proceedings. I watched her kick the turnstile in frustration, and I watched the security guard step forward with his hand resting on his taser. She was finally experiencing a boundary, a real physical and financial boundary that she could not manipulate her way through. For 60 years, she had bulldozed her way through life, using guilt and tears as her currency, using me as her bulldozer, but the bulldozer had turned off the engine and parked. I watched as 2 police officers entered the lobby, likely summoned by Earl's panic button. They approached Mama Louise, and she tried to play the victim immediately, gesturing wildly and crying as she pointed up at the ceiling toward my office. She was probably telling them I was holding her hostage, or that I owed her money, but the officers were clearly not buying it. One of them took her arm, and when she pulled away, he took it again, firmer this time. They began to escort her toward the door, and for a split second, she looked up. She looked straight into the security camera lens, and her eyes met mine through the digital feed. There was shock there, genuine disbelief that I was not coming down to save her, that I was letting the police take her away. She could not comprehend a world where Simone said no. She was escorted out of the building, and the glass doors slid shut behind her, leaving her on the sidewalk alone, defeated. With the $10,000 gone, The house gone, the son stranded in the ocean, and the daughter sitting in a tower she could not climb. I turned off the monitor, and the office felt quiet again. I felt a strange sensation in my chest that was not happiness or sadness, but the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, a burden I had carried since I was a child, finally being set down. I walked back to my desk and opened my email because I had one more message to send to ensure the trap in the Maldives was inescapable. I composed a new email to the general manager of the resort with the subject line, Guest Alert, Marcus Brooks and Tiffany Jenkins. I wrote to inform them that the individuals currently staying in Villa 402 had no means of paying their outstanding balance because the credit card on file had been reported stolen and was invalid. I advised the management to take immediate steps to secure their assets and warned them that the couple might attempt to leave the island without settling their bill. I suggested involving local law enforcement immediately and signed it, "Sincerely, a concerned citizen." I hit send, knowing that the trap in Atlanta had snapped shut on Mama Louise, and the trap in the Maldives was about to close on Marcus and Tiffany. I picked up my purse and checked my reflection in the mirror, seeing that my makeup was still flawless, and I looked like a woman who had just closed the biggest deal of her career. I walked out of my office past the empty desks of my employees, who would be coming in on Monday morning, to a boss who was finally free. I sat in the glow of my computer monitors later that evening, watching the internet turn against me with a fascination that was almost clinical. Tiffany had found Wi-Fi in the hotel lobby, where she and Marcus were currently being detained by security. And while they frantically tried to secure a loan, she had used those precious minutes not to find a solution, but to launch a PR offensive. She went live on Instagram wearing a white robe, looking disheveled and teary-eyed, having perfected the art of the victim aesthetic. She held the phone with a shaking hand, the camera angled down to make her look smaller and more vulnerable, whispering into the microphone that she did not even know where to start. She told her followers that she was currently stranded in the Maldives and that she and her husband were being held hostage by a resort because his sister Simone decided to financially abuse them. The view count on her stream skyrocketed to 5,000, then 10,000, because people love a tragedy, especially a rich people tragedy. Tiffany claimed that I lured them there, that I booked everything and gave them the card as a gift, and then cut them off the moment they landed to control them. She accused me of being jealous that Marcus chose her and claimed I hated her because she was white, calling me a toxic narcissist who used money to manipulate the family. The comment section was a river of sympathy, with people calling me evil, telling her to sue me, and labeling my actions as financial violence. I watched as my own reputation was dragged through the mud, with strangers calling for my head because they saw a crying bride and a mean, rich sister-in-law. Marcus appeared in the background of her video, pacing back and forth and looking stressed, and Tiffany turned the camera to him, sobbing that her husband was broken by his own sister. She screamed that I had stolen their down payment and walked into their wedding to steal $100,000 right off the table. The internet fury intensified, and I was the villain of the week. I took a sip of my espresso, feeling precise rather than angry. Tiffany had made one fatal error. She assumed that because I was silent, I was defenseless, and she assumed that her tears were evidence. She did not know that I archived everything. I stood up and walked over to the blank white wall in my office, where I pulled down the projector screen and connected my laptop to the high-definition projector I used for crisis management presentations. I did not need a ring light or a filter. I needed data. I set up my camera on a tripod, adjusting the frame to include me and the projection screen behind me. I was wearing a sharp black blazer with my hair pulled back in a severe bun, looking like the person you call when you want the truth, not a hug. I hit the go live button on my own social media channels, knowing that while my following was mostly industry professionals, the algorithm would do the rest once the tea started spilling. I greeted the viewers with a calm and steady voice, introducing myself as Simone Brooks, the woman currently being accused of financial abuse. I stated clearly that I was not there to cry or ask for sympathy, but to do a forensic accounting of a relationship. I clicked a button on my remote, and the projector screen behind me lit up with a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that was color-coded, dated, and beautiful. I pointed to the screen and explained that this was a ledger of every dollar I had spent on Marcus and Tiffany in the last 5 years. I zoomed in so the viewers could read the numbers on their phones. Row 4 showed $50,000 for Marcus's legal defense fund. Row 12 showed $30,000 for Tiffany's cosmetic surgery. And row 20 showed $8,000 for rent assistance. I scrolled down the list, letting the rows of car payments, credit card payoffs, vacations, and designer bags scroll past until the total at the bottom was highlighted in bright yellow. $450,000. I turned back to the camera and asked if this was what Tiffany called financial abuse, defining it instead as supporting 2 able-bodied adults for a decade and funding a lifestyle they could not afford. The comments on my stream started to shift immediately, with people asking if the receipts were real and expressing shock at the total amount. I clicked the remote again, and a new image appeared: the bank statement for the American Express card Tiffany was crying about. I explained that the card was in my name, and the bill came to my house, highlighting the charge for the honeymoon flights booked at 6:12 in the evening on the night of the wedding. I pointed out that while they were allegedly heartbroken over the scene I caused, they managed to pause their grief long enough to book first-class tickets on my dime. I asked the audience if that looked like the behaviour of victims or the behaviour of parasites who thought the host would never fight back. The tide was turning, but I knew money was not enough to win the war of public opinion. I needed to address the character assassination. Tiffany had accused me of hating her because she was white, weaponizing race to gain sympathy, and I needed to nuke that narrative. I told the camera that I had one more thing to share, my voice dropping lower and becoming more serious. I explained that Tiffany claimed I moved my seat at the wedding because I was jealous, but I had proof of the real reason. I clicked the remote and the screen went black as a waveform audio file appeared. I explained that as a professional crisis manager, I recorded audio at every event I organised for quality control and liability. I stated that this audio was recorded at 5:15 in the afternoon, inside the St. Regis Ballroom, with the microphone located on the floral centrepiece at table 1. I pressed play, and the sound was crystal clear. Tiffany's voice rang out, complaining that I looked like a beetle in my green dress. Then my mother's voice appeared, telling her to be nice because I paid for the flowers. And then Tiffany again, her voice dripping with venom, saying she did not care what I paid for because I was too dark. The recording played her words perfectly. She said that if I sat at the head table, I would look like a black hole in the photos, and that she wanted creamy, pastel, and light aesthetics. She explicitly stated that she was putting me by the kitchen door so I could help the servers, since I liked serving them so much. The recording ended, and I stood there in silence for a moment, letting the words hang in the air so the internet could hear the bride calling her sister-in-law a black hole. I looked into the camera lens and addressed Tiffany directly, saying that she wanted a clean aesthetic and wanted me out of the frame, so I removed myself and my money. I told her that it was not abuse, it was a refund. I ended the live stream without waiting for the applause because I knew what I had just done. I had just dropped a nuclear bomb on her brand. I refreshed Tiffany's Instagram page and saw that the comments on her crying video were no longer sympathetic. They were a torrent of fire, calling her a racist and a colonizer. Then the brand account started appearing in the comments, signaling the end of her career as an influencer. Tiffany had deals with tea detox companies, fast fashion brands, and a teeth whitening kit, which were her only sources of income outside of my wallet. I watched as a clothing brand commented that they were aware of the audio recording and had zero tolerance for racism, terminating their partnership effective immediately. Another brand commented that they valued inclusivity and were severing ties. A lash company commented that her contract was voided. It was happening in real time. The digital guillotine was falling, and her income streams were drying up before she could even wipe her tears. She was losing her career while sitting in a hotel lobby thousands of miles away, unable to pay for the Wi-Fi to defend herself. I watched the follower count drop by 10,000, then 20,000, as people unfollowed in droves to avoid the radioactive fallout. I closed my laptop, leaving the Excel sheet glowing on the wall as a monument to my liberation. They wanted to make me the villain, but I was richer, smarter, and currently the only one with a valid passport. I poured the rest of the wine into the sink, the taste of victory sweet enough on its own. I had cleared my name and exposed their rot, and now all that was left was the final act, the physical removal, the eviction. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the Atlanta Police Department, because it was time to talk about the squatters in my mother's house. The sun that had risen over the Indian Ocean just a few hours ago was no longer a symbol of paradise for my brother and his new wife, but rather a harsh spotlight illuminating their absolute ruin. Inside the manager's office at the St. Regis Maldives, the air conditioning was humming efficiently, yet Marcus was sweating through his linen shirt as if he was standing in a sauna. The general manager, a man whose polite demeanour had evaporated the moment my email hit his inbox, sat behind a desk made of reclaimed driftwood, with 2 blue American passports sitting just out of reach, held hostage by a bill that was growing by the minute. Marcus was frantic, having tried 5 different credit cards and called his bank, only to be put on hold because he did not have the high priority status that came with my accounts. Tiffany was sitting in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest, her designer beach bag at her feet, looking less like a queen and more like a fugitive awaiting deportation. The manager had made it clear that they were not leaving the island until the $15,400 debt was settled, and if they tried to board a seaplane, the resort security would hand them over to the Maldivian police, because theft of services in a foreign country was a criminal offence, not a civil dispute. I could picture Marcus's desperation perfectly, as he did the only thing he knew how to do when cornered, which was to try and fake his way out of the consequences. He unclasped the Rolex Submariner from his wrist, a watch he had worn to every family gathering for the last 2 years, while flashing it whenever he talked about his real estate sales. He placed it on the desk with a trembling hand and told the manager to keep the passports, suggesting that he take the watch instead, because it was solid gold and worth $20,000. He told the manager to sell it and keep the change, begging him to just let them leave. The manager picked up the watch without needing a jeweler's loupe, holding it for 3 seconds to feel the weight and look at the sweep of the second hand, before setting it back down with a clatter that sounded like a gavel striking a block. He informed Marcus with a voice dripping with disdain that the watch was a replica, a high-quality fake from Canal Street perhaps, but a fake nonetheless. He estimated its value at maybe $300 and warned Marcus not to insult him again. He gave them 1 hour to produce the funds via wire transfer before he called the authorities. Marcus's face crumpled as the golden child was exposed as a fraud in front of his wife, and Tiffany looked up at him with horror, realizing she had married a man who wore a fake watch and spent his sister's money. With no options left, Marcus had to make the call he had been dreading, pulling out his phone to dial a number stored under the name, quote, 12, quote, which was actually a hard money lender in Atlanta who operated out of a strip mall barbershop. I knew about him because I had cleaned up a mess involving him years ago, and I imagined the conversation with Marcus begging in whispers so Tiffany would not hear the predatory terms. The lender agreed to wire $15,000, but demanded the title to Marcus's luxury SUV and an interest rate that would make a credit card company blush. Marcus agreed to everything, signing his life away digitally right there in that office, just to buy his freedom from an island he could no longer afford. When the wire transfer finally cleared 3 hours later, the manager handed back their passports with 2 fingers, as if they were contaminated, and told them to get off his island. He informed them that they had 30 minutes to catch the supply boat to the airport and warned them not to come back. They did not get a seaplane or a private yacht. Instead, they were ushered onto a cargo vessel used to transport food and linens, sitting on hard plastic benches next to crates of papayas and cleaning supplies. The salt spray ruined Tiffany's blowout, and the diesel fumes made Marcus sick, as they were deported from paradise not by a government, but by their own hubris. When they arrived at Valana International Airport, the nightmare truly began, because they had missed their original first-class return flight that I had booked and subsequently cancelled. They were stranded in Male with no tickets and very little cash left from the predatory loan, forcing them to go to the ticket counter, where they learned there were no direct flights and no business class seats available for days. The only option was a red-eye connection through Dubai, followed by a 17-hour flight to Atlanta in economy class on a budget carrier. The tickets cost $3,000, and when Marcus's card declined again, he had to transfer the last pennies from his savings account, leaving him with a balance of $0. They bought the tickets for middle seats in row 48, right next to the lavatories. As they stood in the check-in line, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted, starting with a whisper, as a teenager 2 rows back nudged her friend and pointed. Then a woman in a business suit looked up from her phone, stared at Tiffany, and looked back at her screen. The video of my live stream had gone global in the hours since I had exposed them, and the clip of Tiffany calling me a black hole was trending on Twitter and sitting on the front page of Reddit. Tiffany was not just a random tourist anymore. She was the kitchen door bride, the face of entitlement and racism. I watched the footage later, recorded by a bystander, which showed a group of American tourists recognizing them. One of them, a young black woman with braids, stepped out of line and walked right up to Tiffany, asking loud enough for the whole terminal to hear if she was the girl who needed a clean aesthetic. Tiffany froze and tried to hide behind her sunglasses, but there was no hiding from the truth. The woman turned to the crowd and confirmed that it was her, identifying Tiffany as the one who took her sister-in-law's money and then tried to hide her in the dark. She asked Tiffany how it felt to be in the back of the line, and if this matched her colour palette. Phones went up and flashbulbs went off as people filmed them like animals in a zoo. Tiffany started to cry, but no one offered a tissue, and when Marcus tried to shield her, a man yelled out asking where the fake Rolex was. The humiliation was total, as they were stripped of their curated image layer by layer in a humid airport terminal, surrounded by strangers who knew exactly who they were. They boarded the plane with their heads down, walking past the first-class cabin where they had sat just days ago, all the way to the back of the plane, where the air was stale and the seats did not recline. The flight was a pressure cooker, and at 30,000 feet, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, the silence between them finally broke. It started as a whisper and escalated into a full-blown argument that the flight attendants could not ignore. Tiffany spat that this was Marcus's fault, accusing him of saying that I was a pushover and that I always fixed everything. Marcus shot back, his voice cracking, that I was his sister and was supposed to help, asking how he was supposed to know I would go crazy. Tiffany screamed, heedless of the passengers turning to stare, that I did not go crazy, but rather I woke up. She realized aloud that Marcus was a leech, and that because of him, she was the most hated woman in America, with a dead brand and no sponsors. Marcus tried to say that she still had him, but she yelled that she did not want him. She wanted the house, the lifestyle, and a husband who could afford a real watch. She called him a broke real estate agent with a mountain of debt and accused him of lying about his money, realizing it was never his money, but mine. Marcus stood up in the aisle and shouted that her ego cost them everything, reminding her that if she had just let me sit at table 1, they would be in a water villa right now. A flight attendant appeared and commanded him to sit down, and Marcus slumped into his seat, defeated, realizing he was returning to a life that no longer existed. The taxi ride from the airport to the house in Cascade Heights was silent and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. Marcus and Tiffany had scraped together the last of their cash to pay the driver because their apps were still blocked. The house stood at the top of a hill, a brick colonial that had been the symbol of the Brooks family status for 30 years, the place where Mama Louise held court. They dragged their suitcases up the driveway, the wheels clattering loudly in the humid Atlanta night. Tiffany looked like a ghost in her wrinkled vacation clothes, and Marcus looked like a man walking to the gallows. He pounded on the door because he had lost his key somewhere between the Maldives and Dubai. The door swung open to reveal Mama Louise, wearing her bathrobe with her hair in rollers, looking older than she had at the wedding with puffy red eyes. Relief washed over her face when she saw them, but it was quickly replaced by frantic energy as she pulled Marcus inside, asking if he had talked to me and if he had gotten the money back. She told him that I had come to her job and had her thrown out by security like a criminal. Marcus dropped his bags in the foyer and told her that they did not have the money, that I had cancelled the cards and killed the house deal, and that they were homeless because their lease was up tomorrow. Tiffany pushed past him, announcing that she needed a shower and to sleep for a week, but Mama Louise stepped in front of her to block the hallway. She snapped that Tiffany could not stay there because there was no room and the guest room was full of boxes because she was packing. Marcus asked in confusion why she was packing, and Mama Louise started to cry, a high, thin sound of pure panic, revealing that she was being evicted. She told them the sheriff had come by that afternoon and posted a notice on the door, stating that the owner wanted possession of the property. Marcus frowned and argued that she was the owner because Dad left the house to her. But before she could answer, headlights swept across the front window. Blue lights flashed silently, bouncing off the brick walls, and a siren chirped once. I stepped out of my black Range Rover wearing a black trench coat and sunglasses, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. I did not look like a daughter coming to visit. I looked like a landlord coming to collect. Marcus opened the door and looked at me with hatred, asking what was going on. I walked past him into the foyer, my heels clicking on the hardwood, and told him I was there to oversee the service of process, since Mama had a habit of tearing down legal notices. Marcus shouted that I could not evict my own mother and that Dad left the house to her. But I signalled to one of the deputies who handed me a thick file folder. I pulled out a deed dated 5 years ago and held it up for him to read. I explained that Dad did not leave the house to her. He transferred the deed to me 6 months before he died, because he found out Mama had taken out a second mortgage to pay off a bookie in Atlantic City. I revealed that she was going to lose the house then and gamble away our inheritance, so I paid off the mortgage and property taxes for 5 years, letting her live there rent-free on the condition that she seek help and treat me with respect. I told them she had failed on both counts. I turned to Tiffany, who was shrinking into the shadows, and told her that she was trespassing. When she whispered that they had nowhere to go, I suggested she go to her parents in Savannah, the ones she had called Hicks at the rehearsal dinner. I handed the eviction notice to Mama Louise and told her she had 30 days to vacate, adding that legally I could have her out in 7. Marcus fell to his knees and begged, clutching the hem of my coat, but I looked down at him and felt nothing but a vast, empty indifference. I told him that family does not make you sit by the kitchen door, nor does it steal your credit card. I turned to the deputies and instructed them to ensure the tenants understood the terms. Then I walked out the door without looking back at the wreckage of the family I had finally outgrown. 6 months later, I was sitting at a cafe table at L'Avenue in Paris, overlooking the Eiffel Tower, with the crisp autumn air smelling of roasted chestnuts and expensive perfume. I took a sip of my Sancerre and checked my watch, knowing I had a meeting in 20 minutes with the head of a luxury fashion house who needed a scandal to disappear. My phone buzzed with a notification from my property manager in Atlanta, stating that the Cascade Heights property had been vacated and sold, with offers coming in over the asking price. I smiled and typed back instructions to put the proceeds into a trust fund for my future children. I opened my other app to check on the ghosts of my past. Tiffany and Marcus had lasted 2 months after the eviction, before Tiffany filed for divorce and moved back to Savannah to work as a receptionist. Marcus had fallen the hardest, losing his real estate license and currently driving for Amazon Flex while living in a rented room. Mama Louise was in a state-subsidized senior living facility, alone with her wig collection and no audience. My phone rang with an unknown number from an Atlanta area code, and I knew it was Marcus because it was his birthday. I pressed the side button to silence the ring, then went into the settings and tapped block caller. I looked up at the Eiffel Tower, glittering against the twilight sky, and took a deep breath of freedom. They had wanted me to be invisible, but now I was everywhere, and they were nowhere. I finished my wine, left a €50 tip, and walked out onto the Avenue Montaigne, knowing that this time I was not standing by the door, I was owning the room.